Well, that is a relief. We do not have to worry about inflation anymore. So let's talk about it.
I got a bad feeling about this.
This is the Hey Ed YouTube channel, and I am your host, moderator, and all-around nice guy, Edwin Anderson. Okay, so let's get right to it here. So in Jackson Hole, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, gave a speech, the annual speech at Jackson Hole, and he assured us that he doesn't need to fight inflation anymore.
Inflation is now much closer to our objective, with prices having risen 2.5% over the past 12 months. After a pause earlier this year, progress toward our 2% objective has resumed. My confidence has grown that inflation is on a sustainable path back to 2%.
And it's not just Jerome Powell telling us that everything is fine. According to CNBC, 59% of Americans wrongly think that the U.S. is in a recession. Well, again, I don't know about you, but I'm really relieved to hear that, that there is no recession. Okay, so that's a pretty bold statement. For one thing, the White House doesn't even know what a recession is. If you go to the official White House website, they have a special tab that talks about this subject of recession. How do economists determine whether the economy is in a recession? Now, according to the White House, in the old days, in the old school of thought, the usual definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. Well, that's old school thinking. The truth is, we don't really know what a recession is. I mean, that article there on the website goes on to say, determining recession is really a holistic approach about, and this is almost a verbatim, phrase. It's a holistic approach, a holistic determination based on a whole number of factors. So it's basically, they're saying it's a subjective, opinion about whether we're in a recession or not. This is what politicians do. They don't want to be held accountable for anything, so they lie to you about the actual state of things. And since the mainstream media is on their side, it's not that difficult for them to psyop you into believing, their message. And their intention is to gaslight you. Their intention is to make you believe that everything is just fine and that you should not believe your lying eyes. But here is the truth. Most Americans cannot afford to buy a new house today. Credit card debt is at an all-time high, exceeding $1 trillion for the first time in history. And that's not because they're feeling good about the economy, because a lot of people are using their credit cards, they're maxing out their credit cards just to keep up with their day-to-day needs. Total U.S. household credit card debt has exploded over the past few years. That's not typically a sign of a robust economy. That is a sign of desperation. And that credit card debt is exploding at the same time that the interest rate that they're paying on that debt is exploding. I mean, the average annual interest rate that people are paying on their credit cards is well over 22%. Another really disturbing warning sign is that 40% of 401ks right now are being tapped for hardship withdrawals. So again, people are starting to tap their retirement savings just to make ends meet today. The consumer price index is at an all-time high. It just keeps going up, which is a measure of day-to-day, cost of living. The M2 money supply, which is at the core of what causes inflation, is also continuing to go up. Remember what causes inflation. There's only one creator of inflation, and it's not, corrupt and greedy corporations as the current administration is trying to convince you of. There's only one entity that is responsible for inflation, and that is government. Government spending and the printing of more currency is what creates inflation. And here's a chart that kind of demonstrates the expectation of the growth in our national debt, which is going to create more and more inflation. Hyperinflation is coming. So as I'm recording this, it is August 26, 2024. And right now, as I'm recording this, the U.S. debt is rising by $1 trillion about every 100 days. And as I'm recording this video, the U.S. national debt is $35.2 trillion. Okay, so this is unsustainable. There is no possible way we can pay off this debt. It's not possible. At some point, there is going to be a devastating, earth-shaking event. Now, I can't tell you when it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But when it happens, it's going to happen fast. And let me describe to you how it's going to work. I'm going to read to you a quote from a book called Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. The crack-up boom. Are we there yet? But then, finally, the masses wake up. They become suddenly aware of the fact that inflation is a deliberate policy and will go on endlessly. A breakdown occurs, the crack-up boom appears. Everybody is anxious to swap his money against real goods, no matter whether he needs them or not, no matter how much money he has to pay for them. Within a few weeks or even days, the things which were used as money are no longer used as media of exchange. They become scrap paper. Scrap digital entries. Nobody wants to give anything away against them. It was this that happened with the continental currency in America in 1781, with the French mandat territoire in 1796, and with the German mark in 1923. It will happen again when the same conditions appear. If a thing has to be used as a medium of exchange, public opinion must not believe that the quantity of this thing will increase beyond all bounds. Inflation is a policy that cannot last. So what he's describing there is that when the time comes where the currency is just losing value at an accelerated rate, people are going to start piling into hard assets, namely gold and silver. And people are not going to let go of their gold and silver easily, not for fiat currency, which is now garbage, right? They're not going to want to part with their valuable hard assets, gold and silver, for garbage pieces of paper money. I mean, just for the sake of, giving you guys a concrete example, let me remind you of an event that took place in relatively modern history, right? And that is the Weimar Republic, which really wasn't that long ago. So this is a chart of what happened to the German Deutschmark versus gold. And you'll see here that in just a 4-year period, from, let's call it 1919 to 1923, the value of one gold mark versus gold was essentially a 1-to-1 ratio. You can take your $1, German mark and go into the bank and get 1 ounce of gold. But by 1922, that increased to 100. It would take 100 German marks to buy that same 1 ounce of gold. And then by the end of 1923, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But by the end of 1923, it would take you 1 trillion Deutschmark to buy 1 ounce of gold. Remember, just 4 years earlier, you could buy 1 ounce of gold with 1 German mark. But by the end of 1923, 4 years later, it took 1 trillion German marks to buy 1 ounce of gold. And of course, there are those famous images of people taking wheelbarrows of currency, of Deutschmarks, to the store to buy 1 loaf of bread. This was a real world event. And 4 years earlier, nobody dreamed that that could happen. So now I want to show you a spectacular comparison. So the chart on the right is the chart that I just showed you, demonstrating the 4-year move of the German Deutschmark against 1 ounce of gold. And the chart on the left is the chart of gold versus the US dollar. And the chart on the left goes back to 2002. Now, as you'll see, that right now, again, as I'm recording this video, gold is making an all-time high. Gold is breaking out. Now, I want you to take a look at this, this little section of the chart of gold versus the US dollar. Now, you can't quite see it on the chart on the right, but just kind of trust me here that this little period before the breakout of gold in Germany exactly mimics the chart that we're seeing right now in gold in today's prices. So the question becomes, are we going to see another breakout in gold versus the US dollar like we saw in Germany during the Weimar Republic? Could that possibly happen? Could we see, a 10,000x in the price of gold? Which, if that happens, that basically means that our US dollar is worthless. And if you think that that is, unthinkable, let me show you something here. This is what the US dollar has done over the past 100 years, since 1913. The US dollar has lost 99% of its buying power. Let me repeat that. The US dollar, since 1913, has lost 99% let's be generous. Let's call it 98% of its buying power. So we're down to that last 2% of its original buying power. I mean, in 1913, if you took, a $20 face value, gold ounce, and you took it into a bank, they would give you $20 in cash. Okay. It was a 1-to-1 ratio. But now we've lost 98% of that value, 98%. And what causes that? The sole cause of inflation is government policy. It's government. Government is responsible for all of this, not corporate greedy corporations, okay? If you think that the US dollar cannot go extinct, let me remind you of something else. Here is a chart of the world's reserve currencies since 1450. So in 1450, the world reserve currency then was Portugal, and then they went under, then became Spain, then the Netherlands, then France, then Britain, and now the USA. And if you look at the average lifespan of those world reserve currencies, it's around 100 years, okay? And we are right now at 94 years plus, as a world reserve currency, the US dollar. Fiat currencies, in our case here in the US, it's the US dollar, right? Fiat currencies have a 100% failure rate. Every single fiat currency that has ever existed has failed. So while that evil elitist cabal is trying to get you to eat bugs, for the sake of, whatever, that is all a distraction. That is all to keep you worrying about the wrong things. You need to be worrying about your own existential issues. Okay, so let's pause for a second and talk about why the Federal Reserve has given up on fighting inflation. Okay, now remember, the Federal Reserve's job is basically a dual mandate, right? The primary job is to fight inflation, to keep inflation low. Their target is 2%. And their other mandate is to keep the economy humming along, to keep the masses happy by making sure that they're employed. Now, the most powerful tool that the Fed has for fighting inflation is interest rates. The idea being is that when inflation gets out of control, they raise rates in order to bring inflation down. Now, remember, when they do that, in effect, they are purposely trying to make your life more difficult. They're making everything more expensive because they want you to stop spending money. So when you are out there spending money like a drunken sailor, that creates inflation, and they have to make that more painful for you. They have to make it more expensive for you to continue doing that. So they raise interest rates, which increases the cost of borrowing money in order to maintain your lifestyle. So again, when they raise interest rates, they're purposely trying to make you miserable so that you stop spending money. That is, it's tough love, right? The flip side of that is when they're unhappy with the growth rate of the economy, they want to spur business, they want to spur spending by lowering the interest rates. So cost of money becomes cheaper. Now, Wall Street loves cheap money. And that's why over this past, 6 weeks or so, the market has been popping here. Let's take a look. The market has been having a really nice, recovery from this nasty sell-off earlier in the month because of the anticipation of a rate cut. And last week in Jackson Hole, when Jerome Powell decided that we do not need to raise rates anymore, the market decided, oh, okay, it's a party again. But this is not healthy. So this is why I'm telling you, hyperinflation is a given. It is coming. The Federal Reserve has decided that it's far more important to keep the masses happy by giving them sugar highs in the short term, maybe because there's an election coming up. This is not rocket science, my friends. This is really cynical stuff that they're doing. They are mortgaging your children's futures in order to give you a little holiday, at the moment. So the Federal Reserve said, in Jackson Hole, that their priority at the moment is to juice the economy, is to, give an injection straight into your bloodstream of free money or at least cheap money, right? That's their priority. But there's always a hangover that you have to pay for that party you had the night before. That is what's coming. They are accelerating the demise of our economy and the demise of the US currency. And there is going to be an event. A day is going to come where something's going to happen that's going to pop this bubble. It's going to be a black swan event that's going to come out of left field that's going to give everyone an excuse to take their profits and to sell. And when that happens, things are going to unravel quickly. Another thing that's worth reminding you is that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. Okay, the Federal Reserve Bank, right? Well, it's not federal. They don't have any reserves, and it's not a bank. They're not accountable to our government. So what should you be doing right now? Reduce your exposure to your bank, get your money out of the damn bank, buy some gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. Gold and silver, they're a way of, number one, preserving your buying power. And number two, in the event of a catastrophic event, you might be the richest guy in the neighborhood just by acquiring a small amount of gold and silver right now. So do not believe the lies that the media and the government are shoving down your throats. Don't believe it. I mean, if you want to continue to get the truth, please subscribe and hit that like button and give me some comments below. Tell me whether you agree with the government that inflation is not an issue right now. Please like, subscribe, and share. Ed Anderson, live from Minnesota, signing out.
Copy that.